Hi, this is Tim and Joel. Welcome to Midwest Hunting and Outdoors by Two Dumbasses,
a podcast about the outdoors, hunting,
and being a steward of the land. All right, Jeremy, you said one piece of this action plan is planting, and we went through those several options there and talked through it, but I know a big one and a personal one that has touched me is TSI. So can you define TSI? It's an acronym. It stands for?
Yeah, timber stand improvement. So timber stand improvement, also the term FSI, forest stand improvement. And sometimes we use them interchangeably. But it's the process of thinning your timber. It's removing undesirable trees so your desirable trees grow and thrive. And so I'm using the term, very wide terms of removing undesirable trees. There can be a lot of trees that fit into that term. So again, back to your goals, if you're wanting to grow veneer logs, you're only going to release your highest quality potential veneer trees. And so you might have a few of those. If you're wanting to manage for diversity, your crop tree list, your keepers, might have 15, 30 different species on it for diversity purposes. All these things are good. For saw timber production, you're probably not going to release white elm crop trees. You're going to pick a species that grows a little better, has longevity, has a little more value. Maybe an oak, maybe a walnut, maybe a red elm. So a lot of different purposes for timber stand improvement. Acorn production, we already touched on that a little bit, releasing a large oak crown so it gets more sunlight, increase acorn production. Very important. Timber stand improvement is one of the most satisfying things for me as an expert, as a forestry expert, and usually for the landowner. You can go into the woods, you're literally cutting trees and killing trees. That's a big decision, but you're making a big impact for a long time, for the rest of the life of that stand.
So wait a second here. So when you say killing trees, so are you saying, hey, I'm cutting it down and I'm pouring some Turdon on it, or am I hinge cutting it and letting it continue to grow up little saplings and stuff like that?
Okay, so it might be a variety of things. The primary goal is usually to remove the crown, deaden the crown, so you're removing competition. You want your crop tree to thrive. So you got to kill trees around it. And number one thing is to deaden the crown. So there's a variety of ways to do that. One of the ways is no herbicide. You can double girdle that tree. So you're using normally a chainsaw, and you're cutting a groove into the wood, past the bark into the wood, about 1.5 inches deep, and you ring it all the way around and connect it. So you're severing the conductive tissue so the tree can't flow sap. And then some trees could potentially grow and bridge over that and continue to live. So you drop down 6 or 8 inches and make a second girdle. So girdling is a very popular way to deaden the tree. It still may sprout out of the ground. That's okay. That provides browse if that's one of your goals. The main goal was to release the crop tree, so you've deadened the crown to do that. So you can leave that tree standing. If it's a large tree, that's the safest way for you to deaden the crown. Double girdle it, leave the tree standing there. Now it becomes a snag. Now we've entered a whole nother realm of wildlife habitat. Snags are super important in the forest. Most timber stands would like to walk in and be able to see about 7 to 10 snags per acre of various sizes. A 4-inch dead snag might not last very long. It might last 4, 6, 10 years. An 18 or 20-inch diameter snag might last 20 years. So they provide different niches of habitat. Plus, as the tree's dying, insects are coming to feed on those trees. Then come the songbirds and the woodpeckers. And then maybe a woodpecker hollows out a cavity, or maybe a squirrel hole gets hollowed out to become a wood duck hole. So a lot of important uses for snags in the woods. And that's good. So having some dead trees is a good thing.
So Jeremy, just to clarify snag, so a snag is defined as a dead tree, and that could be, just a stump,
Yep.
right? It could be a stump or half a tree, or it could be a tree that's blown over with the roots still in
Yep.
the ground, but dead or dying.
Yep.
Or it could be a tree laying flat on the ground.
Yep. So normally a snag is upright.
Okay.
Once we get on the ground, we start labeling that as detritus or large woody debris.
Okay.
Still provides an important habitat niche, plus it's naturally decomposing and recycling new soil and nutrients.
But a
Very important.
different function in the habitat.
A snag is normally a standing dead tree. And they aren't instantly they aren't instantly cavity trees either. You know what? You can say you needed to girdle an oak. You have a misshapen oak and you have another straight oak next to it. You decided it was your crop tree, you need to release it, so you deaden the misshapen oak because it's crooked or whatever, or the top broke out in a windstorm. You can kill it and leave it standing there, but it's not necessarily instantly a snag. The wood, through a decay process, becomes usable to more wildlife species for cavity purposes. Even coons and pileated woodpeckers and wood ducks. So hard wood is not always what they want immediately to make a cavity. As decay process continues, then they'll use it for more cavities. We walked out in your woods earlier and we found a tree stump that was about 5 feet tall with a hole in it where a chickadee or maybe even a bluebird had nested. So even that 4-inch diameter, 5 foot tall stump of what used to be a tree is still providing habitat. A pretty cool niche.
And that's called releasing. I mean, you're basically releasing means you're killing trees around this tree that you want to enhance to perform. Is that correct? I mean, it's kind of that's when you say
Right.
releasing, that's what it means.
That's right. You're releasing it for competition. So you want to be really good at your tree identification or ask an expert. Pick the species you want to favor. Pick the quality trees you want to favor for whatever reasons. If you want to grow some saw logs, pick the species you want for acorn production. If you want, mix all those things together. Every acre of your forest is different. One stand you might have a lot of white oak trees to release. Your next stand you might have some red oak and black oak. You might have some black walnut. Whatever species are appropriate for that site.
And in my case, there were some zones that, the direction you gave me was, hey, let's wait 5 or 10 years and look at it again, right? It's good.
Back to the stocking charts, you can determine of how well you're using the potential growth on that acre. So if it's growing well and there's still room to grow, you let it grow. And then the fun thing was you came back and asked, hey, what if we did something with the understory? What does that do? Well, that might let more light in. You're not affecting your canopy trees. They're growing and thriving and doing well for another 10 years. You could maybe do some understory work if you want to change the plant community down here. Different type of timber stand improvement. So the crop tree release is a sort of an intermediate. It's like going to the garden in June and July and weeding before there's any crops ready.
Got it.
You're getting rid of some things you don't want that are inhibiting your growth. So crop tree release helps you pick some of those species. We often like to do timber stand improvements. Like on an oak stand, we'd like to do it at least once before the stand's 50 years old. And then once you get it to stand, once you've been through it and picked your crop trees and things are thriving and growing, you might be back to reevaluate every 10 years. Monitor for insect disease, monitor for invasive species. As your trees grow, they will again become crowded over the long term, over another 10 or 15 year window. It may be time to thin again. You might actually thin an oak stand 2 or 3 times through its lifespan, from acorn seedling to 20 to sawmill. You might thin a stand 2 or 3 times through there to maximize your growth and your acorn production.
Yeah, it's a neat process. Can people do this themselves? What would you encourage? People to do themselves, or hire someone to do this, or some combination?
Some combination. Every landowner is different. and it depends on if forestry is a labor of love. Timber stand improvement is hard work. You're normally lugging a chainsaw around. All chainsaws should come with helmets, eye protection, chaps, all the safety gear. And then after that, it starts to become, well, this tree is 4 inches diameter. I'm comfortable with cutting this to meet my objective. This tree is 14 inches diameter. This is getting dangerous. I don't want to have to cut this down. I would maybe double girdle this instead. So those are some of the things through the process. But don't ever forget, if you get in over your head or if you want to look for other help, there are forestry contractors that landowners can hire to help execute those plans. Once you have a plan, that stewardship plan, you could literally hand it off to a private forester and start executing those projects. So if you get cost share, that helps offset your expenses. You can work through it for if you're limited based on your budget, you could do X number of acres per year if you want, and just keep plugging away at it. If you want, you could do it all in 1 year and be done.
I was smirking because, I have a dead tree. I believe it's an elm. And it's probably, I don't know, it's right around that 14 to 20 inch in diameter. Yeah. I'm not afraid of it from a size perspective, but it is so perfectly symmetrical, and it's on a ravine. And where I want it to fall might not, and where I'm trying to cut it to get it to fall, hey, I don't know. Depending on the wind. So I've cut my notch. I'm into my way, and I'm cutting it down, and I'm sitting here and I'm looking at it. My wife's filming me the whole time.
Oh boy.
And so she's like going, I firmly think she's filming it to watch my death. And that's what I heard. And I kept looking at it. I looked up about 3-4 times, and I go, no matter what I do, I can't tell which way this thing's going to fall. And I walk away. I just said, you know what? And it's in an area I don't have to worry about it ever falling on somebody. And I actually took Joel over there, and I go, take a look at this thing. And his term for it was, he goes, that's a widowmaker. Yeah. And he goes, it could go either which way. And I think the important thing is walk away. If you're unsure, walk away. Give it to some professional.
Good call. Boy, sizing up trees for felling is a whole nother show. And I'm comfortable with what I do and with what I cut, but everyone's different.
It's not worth it.
Yeah, no good exit route off that tree either.
No, and I'm not as nimble as what I used to be.
None of us are. Yeah. Escape routes are always at a 45-degree angle away from the tree. Well, if you don't know what direction that tree's going to fall, you don't always know your escape route. So that's a watch out situation.
Yeah,
it's a bad one.
Go ahead. Hey, one more thing. So sounds like you fell a fair amount of trees. Is that true?
Yeah. We burn about 5 cords of wood a winter too, so I cut quite a bit. I learned a lot of bad habits on the chainsaw younger, and then I got some professional training about 15-20 years ago, close to 20 years ago now, and wish I never would have picked up a chainsaw back when I was younger, but because those bad habits are hard to break.
Sure.
Now that I've got some professional training, worked for the Forest Service a little bit on a couple wildfire details. Now I really enjoy. It's still dangerous, but I still enjoy running a chainsaw. I'm doing work at home.
So we talked a little while ago. So we had an episode on your 5 tools, and we got into the ditches on favorite chainsaw. What's your favorite chainsaw?
Well, so I think the best answer is it really depends on your favorite saw shop, because your mechanic is super important. So that's my number one answer. But number 2 is I pretty much always run steel.
Steel.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're both steel. And I'm a firm believer in that synthetic fuel.
Okay.
Do you ever use that?
I don't, but more power to you. So that's okay.
I think it does. I think so. I had a couple Amish guys out there, and this guy had some shit piece of chainsaw, and he says, I need a new chainsaw. And I said, you ought to try this synthetic fuel, because he said it wouldn't stop from running. And he poured that in. It started right up. Well, not right up, but it started up. and ran so much smoother than it was with that premix, with the
Awesome.
premix. I'm a believer.
We're not sponsored by
No.
synthetic fuel or
No, and it's
or
expensive.
we're not sponsored by steel as far as
Yeah.
yet, right? So we're trying.
But the thing is I mean, hey, if I can avoid having to take my chainsaw in for carburetor problems,
Yep.
that's what I think it does
Save
for you.
hands.
Because they said that the guy at the steel store told me that stuff that you mix, the lifespan on that's 90 days.
I don't doubt that.
And he goes, the lifespan of that synthetic fuel is 2 years. So he said, you can leave it in your chainsaw, it's not going to cause you any problems.
I go through fuel quite a bit quicker than that.
Sounds like it.
5 quarts a year. That's
Well, thanks for listening to me and entertaining
Yeah. Well, yeah, when it comes to brands, research. There's so many forums, online forums, podcasts, so many places to get information. But go to your local shop and talk to your guy.
I agree.
I've got a steel dealer nearby. I've got a Dalmar dealer. Nothing wrong with either one of them. It really helps having a good mechanic.
It is
I
key
agree.
to have that dealership and
Yeah.
support function behind your saw, right?
Yep.
So, Jeremy, on TSI, before we move on, is there anything that we skipped that you would add on TSI?
Yeah, there's a whole nother slew of practices that we do that deals with understory trees. Often in older stands. So for example, oak stands that are getting to be, say, 16 or 18 inches diameter and bigger, those might be 75, 85-year-old stands plus, give or take a little bit. If they're growing really, really slow, 100-year-old stand. But now you start to get into the point where, okay, we're thinking about maturity. One of my goals might not be selling timber today, but when those trees hit 18 inches, 20, 22 inches diameter, they're getting to be valuable. Someone else might knock on your door and offer you money for those trees. That might change your perspective and your goals a little bit, because you have some value, something you might want to utilize, capitalize someday. You can sell trees. Selling trees in Iowa is a normal thing. There's good ways to do it and there's bad ways to do it. Almost a whole nother show. But if you're gonna remove part of the canopy, sell some trees, what is gonna be the next generation of trees? That's normally what's in the understory. And those are trees that grow in the shade. Because you have an oak canopy above you have shaded conditions below, trees that grow in the shade, elm, hackberry, bitternut hickory, ironwood, much less desirable trees. Lower value saw logs, lower value for wildlife purposes. They're not worthless for wildlife purposes, but lower value. So oftentimes we'll start to do understory removals, or what we call a weeding. And that's a matter of removing understory trees to let more light to the ground. That provides a disturbance. That's one of the ways to help regenerate oak seedlings. You may have some oak seedlings on the ground, you may not. The way you can improve that is to get sunlight to the ground. So one practice for that is a weeding or understory removal. Very important to do at the time of harvest if you are going to harvest trees. If it's not for harvest purposes and it's more for wildlife purposes, it's a great excuse to increase your herbaceous growth. Everything that grows from, say, head high down, you're letting light in to help improve that. Lots of woodland flowers and forbs, lots of woodland sedges, native plants. Sometimes it's exotics. If you're letting light in and you have a lot of exotic species, they're going to thrive. So that's important to evaluate with your forester. If I do a timber thinning up here and let light in, am I just letting multiflora rose thrive or honeysuckle? So all those things have to be taken into account before you really start executing your plan.
So I do have a quick question. So as we go through this TSI, because you did pretty extensive TSI on yours, this is more for our listeners. How long, what does it take for that TSI impact to impact their wildlife habitat that they're trying to,
What part of the habitat? You mean the
So-
herbaceous growth on the ground?
yeah,
Yeah.
for browse, trying to create browse, et cetera.
Great. See, I'm trying to get you to
Yep,
focus
yep,
down.
yep.
You make changes in the first year because you're letting light in, so
Mm-hmm.
you see a response in the first year. 2 to 3 years later, it's usually a very drastic difference. But it depends on how much you thin out of the canopy. If you do a heavy thinning and let in a lot of light, you see changes quicker. You see them within a year, 18 months. If you just do a very light thinning and remove only a few trees out of the canopy, you're only making incremental changes that you may not be able to notice.
Okay, good.
So the sunlight is a big piece of that, it sounds like.
Managing sunlight is a huge part of forestry. Oak seedlings need sunlight to grow, so you gotta thin some trees. Crop trees need sunlight to the crown. You gotta thin trees. Yeah.
Anything else on TSI before we move on to another topic?
That for the most part, we've kind of gone over it with the broad stroke of the brush. That's good.
I mean, would you say that TSI is probably the biggest tool or the most common tool, in the tool belt from a forestry standpoint?
Yes, absolutely. And most of it we execute with handwork, chainsaws, sometimes herbicides, sometimes not.
How about, sorry to interrupt you. How about if I have a bobcat with one of those
Yeah.
cutters, brush cutters? Does that work?
So, we get pretty nervous taking machinery into the forest.
Sure.
That doesn't mean we don't do it. We use machinery to harvest trees. You need a tool to do the job. Oftentimes when we're doing a timber stand improvement, if we're trying to deaden trees, we're dealing with trees that are bigger than what a forestry mulcher could deal with.
Okay.
If you were doing, say, brush management, getting rid of invasive shrubs, that might be a really good tool.
Yeah, also I was thinking about the edge, you have these
Yeah.
guys you can go through and they take out, 4 or 5 inch.
Yeah. So it all depends on the equipment you have. A rotary brush cutter is not really going to do that. An expensive forestry mulcher might. So you got to balance out
Cost.
how much you want to spend per acre with a forestry mulcher, or do you want to do less impact and do it by hand? One's not necessarily right or wrong over the other.
Okay.
So let's put TSI on the shelf here a little bit. What other, just kind of high level, what other typical tools would be included in a forestry plan?
Yeah, so you may have invasive species management.
Mentioned invasive species. Let's touch on that. I know there's a lot. It's a big, again, as you said, an episode by itself probably. But maybe let's start with what is an invasive species, and then what are the common, top 3, 5, whatever that you see in your 100 surveys a year.
Okay, so an invasive species is an exotic plant, a non-native plant that gets established and outcompetes our native plants. So that may be minor amounts or very major amounts, and can completely change the hydrology of a site. For example, a really bad honeysuckle infestation is heavily shaded, and there's almost no herbaceous growth left on the ground. So potentially more soil erosion. So invasive species are one of the top threats for our forest lands in Iowa and probably across the USA. The most common ones that we deal with, it varies a little bit across Iowa, but multiflora rose, honeysuckle, and autumn olive. So different shape, different habits. Some of the others for northern Iowa also include buckthorn. We're all starting to see more Japanese barberry. That is on the radar, and it's startling me how much we see more and more of. I visited recently with our botanist and told him some of my concerns, and he spooked me and said, well, yeah, I'm seeing that all over the place in Iowa, and that's not good. It's bad news. So things that we do in our yards and cities and on our home, in our yards and our acreages can have negative effects as well. So those invasive species spreading into the timber are bad, period. Now there are different degrees or trigger points for making decisions. The older they get, the bigger they are, the more expensive they are to control. So one of the things that you do during the process of your timber cruise and your site visit is determining how bad they're affecting your goals and how bad they're affecting your forest. One of the trigger points is if the invasive species is more than 25% or more than 50% of your plant community, you've got a problem. If it's more than 50%, you got a big problem. So then you try to figure out what tools do I need to do to control this invasive species. One practice is not going to do it. You mentioned the forestry mowers, forestry mulchers earlier. Sometimes that's a practice to try to remove large honeysuckle and autumn olive bushes. Well, sometimes we see a lot of resprouts, stump resprouts and root resprouts after that. So you still might need a follow-up. That might be an herbicide application, a foliar herbicide application, or a controlled burn, or come back in and do a hack and squirt, which is a different method for killing woody plants. So, yeah, invasive species can be extremely expensive, very intimidating, but you've got to start somewhere and just start plugging away with it. If we don't, you can lose your plant community. Honeysuckle can grow so large and so thick that you can't walk through the stand. So then it's, from a recreation standpoint, you almost throw your arms up and don't know what to do. If it gets that bad, then the wildlife, specifically deer, stop navigating through that area.
Yeah.
So bad news.
I have some personal experience with honeysuckle. I have, our residence it's all honeysuckle. It's an old coal mine area, and my wife loves it because it's honeysuckle for bees.
Yeah.
But it's just everywhere.
Yeah, we cut a small hole in it and it took us. I mean, it's just like you described. There's no way you could walk through it.
Yeah. And it's not always. It provides some greenery. It provides some browse. That's one of the reasons it used to be planted. The birds and small mammals like the fruit. That's how it's getting spread. So there's a good lesson for everyone there, for anyone that owns property. If you're planting something that's not native, you've got to ask yourself, is this the right thing to do? Research, gather more information. Is this potentially going to be a problem? And make sure you're trying to do what's best for you on your property, but also around you. Honeysuckle and autumn olive were used a lot for wildlife plantings, for windbreaks, and they've just spread like wildfire.
Let's maybe stay with multiflower, because I think, at least in the state of Iowa, people have some experience with that, right? Is it true, first, how it was initiated? The wise tale is, the history that I was always told is, hey, this was brought in back in the day to alleviate fences, putting in fences, and because it's thorny, it's bushy, it grows fast. Is that the history behind it?
Yeah, as far as I know, that's true. It was also used for wildlife plantings, for habitat plantings. But now we know it's at the cost of our native plants.
And what's the what's the downside to multiflower rose?
Yeah, so it can, really bad scenarios, it can grow quite large. It will climb as a vine, but that's not most common. I've seen it 12, 14 feet tall.
Wow.
Climbing a tree. That's not normal, but it can do that. In large clumps, if it gets enough sunlight in the woods, a large clump will grow real thick and impenetrable. And then you'll look underneath on the ground, and there may be very little or no native herbaceous growth.
It's usually barren.
So it can be,
right?
Yeah, but it's not it's fixable. Multiflora rose is is one of those species that's controllable. It takes a lot of work, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, some money, a lot of time, but it's doable. There's a variety of ways you can deal with that. You can do foliar sprays during the growing season. One popular product, I think the most common product is probably Crossbow. I see very mixed results with success. I encourage people to maybe try using Escort. It's a little trickier. You're spraying an extremely small quantity, but really good control. That's for foliar sprays. You could potentially, if it's a real bad stand, you might use a forestry mulcher to get it under control the first time, or bush hog it with a tractor and a bush hog. If you can cut it off during blazing hot day in July and August and force it to use root reserves to sprout, you're taking away energy from that plant. And then maybe follow up with a spray on those sprouts, or prescribed fire, or a combination of 2 or 3 of these over a 10-year window.
And just cutting multiflower rose, what's the success of just cutting it? Will it just go away?
No, that's just about 0, because it will sprout.
It's just a matter of time before it comes back.
You can, I'm glad you brought that up. Cut stump is another treatment that you can use. So you literally cut it off and treat the stems with herbicide. Very effective, very time consuming, but it is a good tool.
Tordon work on that?
Yeah, Tordon's labeled for that. There are a lot of products labeled for cut stump. The triclopirs, which Garlon is probably the most popular. Glyphosate, some of the Roundup label for cut stump, you're typically applying at 50 to 100% concentration.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
For cut stump, very inexpensive. You're using a tiny bit of product. You could spray cut stumps, or you could dab it on with paintbrushes. You're using very small amounts of product. There's several ways to apply it. The product you mentioned, Tordon, comes in a squirt bottle. Really easy to over apply. You turn that bottle over, you almost don't need to squeeze it.
Yep.
One of the common complaints with Tordon is flashing, this dead zone around where you treated. And most of the time that appears to be from over application, just an easy error to make. And Tordon has a very long half-life. It's a residual in the soil for a long time.
So you're saying don't use it?
No, I'm not. I wouldn't go that far. I use it. I'll probably continue to use it in certain cases. It's handy. Boy, you can carry around a quart bottle, go to town and pick up a quart bottle, use it according to the label, don't over apply it, put it on the right species.
I will tell you, I would agree. It's easy to over apply. One of the things I've been doing is so it has a little protector label or seal in it. And I just put a small hole in it. Just put a small hole in that, so it kind of already acts as a stopper anyway. So you'd really have to really squirt it to try to get it to come out super fast. And then I put the lid on it, and then we're
Good idea.
yeah.
That little pop top on there is real handy.
Yep.
Also, it's easy to over apply.
I think Kevin, in a past episode, he didn't talk about this in a past episode, but I think when I had him out here doing my forest cruise, mentioned that there's actually a mold or bacteria that's been introduced that's to kill multiflower rose.
Yeah, rosette. Yeah. We actually saw a fair amount of mortality in the past year. 2 years ago, I'll backtrack a little bit. 2 years ago, we had a lot of winter kill in multiflora rose. We had a warm spell in January for about a week, and then got brutal cold again in February. And that warming and then the harsh freeze caused a lot of top kill too. Yeah.
Interesting.
So good news.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Was that introduced, or is that a man-made introduction?
I believe so. I don't know the specifics on it, but I believe that's right. Oh. And I've also heard from other experts you can move the fungus by clipping infected growth. Might have a reddish tinge, often twisted or deformed growth, and literally beat it onto other bushes to spread it. Yeah.
Anything else from an invasive standpoint that you'd like to touch on?
Yeah, don't ignore it. Address it early and be serious about it. If you don't have invasive species, keep it that way. Can always recon to find out if you've got it, if it's started, get after it. Garlic mustard, I should have mentioned as another invasive species. Garlic mustard is a colonizing plant. It's biennial. First year is a a leaf rosette. Second year is a flower stalk. So that first year, when you can catch them in the rosette, you can actually do an herbicide application. You can do it during January and February when all of our native plants are dormant, so there's no collateral damage. So just stay on top of it. Autumn olive and honeysuckle are the biggest issues and potentially very, very expensive. So get on them and get rid of them.
Okay. Man, I think the garlic mustard is what you educated me on the last trip
Right.
here. After the first year, if you don't address it the first year, is it progressively get harder to deal with?
No, not necessarily, but once it starts producing seed, it produces thousands of seed in a little tiny plot. And so wildlife can move that seed. If we walk through there, you'll hear almost like projectile seed flying off into the distance as you walk through it. So we're spreading seed. Spread it on our boots. If you mow that patch, you're going to spread seed like crazy.
Yeah, that's nasty.
It's just a matter of catching the plant, no matter what year it is. If it's year 6 of your infestation or 16, catching those plants in the early spring on a warm day, they'll be actually processing photosynthesis even when our native trees and shrubs are still dormant, and you can hit them with the application of Gly and kill them out. There are other methods. You can pull the plants, bag them and throw them on the burn pile. That's great if you've got a 6 foot by 6 foot area. If you've got quarter or an acre, it's impossible.
Yeah, tough.
Yeah, this is all I'm giving my perspective, my examples of ways to control plants. There are many, many more.
Yeah. What else on the plan? I mean, what else have we? It seems like we've covered a lot of territory here at some level, right? Is there any big subjects that that we haven't touched on?
Document. Try to keep some notes. As time goes on, we're fanatics about our hunting practices and write notes and journals and maps and all the fun stuff because we have passion for those things. Try to keep some notes along the way for your accomplishments, for your forest stand improvements and your tree plantings. Your district foresters help with that too. It's really awesome to go to a property that had a forest stewardship plan 25, 40, 60 years ago and see what happened. That's why this stand is what it is today, and it's really great to have those records.
That's really that's something you really pioneered for me. I mean, you started to put together a farm diary, and now I have a farm diary, to where not just timber, hey, I stocked so many fish, this is what I stocked, I planted so many trees, blah, blah, blah. And I think it's a good practice.
Keep good records. 20 years ago, a forester older than me gave me a real sound advice, and he said, no matter what you do, keep good notes. And that's priceless.
Yeah, the older you get, the faster stuff leaves your brain too, right?
He knew that when
It's
he was telling
amazing.
me.
One subject that comes to mind that we haven't really talked with you about is, hinge cutting has, comes up, especially from a hunting standpoint, right? And I know it was big. I don't know how big it is now, but I know it was the big thing back, let's say 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah.
What's your position on hinge cutting?
Yeah, it has its place. It's not always the right thing to do. It all depends on your goals. I'll say right off the bat, if you can't identify tree species, you probably shouldn't be hinge cutting. If you haven't evaluated for any timber stand improvement, if you haven't done any timber stand improvement yet, you probably shouldn't be hinge cutting. Because one of the purposes for hinge cutting is to let light into the ground for growth, so you can do that with timber stand improvement. Another purpose is to provide browse. If you So through the practice of timber stand improvement, if you're felling trees, those stumps often sprout. That provides good browse. So I'm playing games here a little bit. You can achieve these things by doing good forest management as well. Just because you have a chainsaw doesn't mean you should be felling trees. Hinge cutting is dangerous. The practice, the technique for doing it is a no-no. You could talk to any professional logger, any professional chainsaw safety instructor, and the practice of partially cutting through a tree to fell it slowly and try to keep it intact is often very dangerous because trees barber chair. The tree falls so slow, the fibers tear and pull apart, and the back half of the tree snaps up, and that kills people. All right, your chances of getting hurt are low, but it kills people. And thankfully, we have not seen that happen through hinging in Iowa. It does kill loggers. It's not good, so be extremely careful. Now, to do it successfully, one, you want to pick species that the wildlife will browse on, and two, you want to pick smaller diameter trees. So basically, most of the time, you want to be hinging trees that are less than 6 inches diameter.
So would you be an advocate then of, instead of looking at hinge cutting an area, to maybe just kind of TSI an area and let it sprout back out?
Yeah, absolutely. Manage your whole stand. Get the whole stand working towards your goals. But hinging can provide some things, no doubt about it. You put a tree on the ground, and if you can keep that stem alive, that's hard to do, but if you can keep the stem alive, it provides a lot of browse. What you want to watch out for, I've seen it overdone many times. And if you go through your timber area and hinge a lot of trees, you're putting a lot of browse potentially a lot of browse on the ground at once. If that tree stays alive and sprouts and gets up above browse line, now what do we have? Maybe just a misshapen tree. And then, okay, scratch your heads, what are we gonna do with it? Are we gonna leave it? Are we gonna hinge it again? Are we gonna kill it with herbicide? What are we gonna do? So start all things in moderation. Start with if you're going to do that practice, maybe pick a couple of trees per acre, apply it in the area you want to. Maybe it's 5 acres of your entire property, whatever. Start in a small area, hinge a few of those trees, watch and monitor with the browse activity for the next year. If they're mowing it down, you got a lot of deer and they're loving it, then you could add more trees per acre. If the sprouts are growing fast and outpacing the deer and the browsing, then you retract and you don't need as many.
Interesting, because I know that everything you read and any seminar that you went to, that was like the magic bullet for a while there. But interesting.
I think it was a missed opportunity. I would like to take that same number of people and apply timber stand improvement for their forest management.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Tim, any final questions you've got?
No, this has really been great. I tell you what, I've been really reflecting a lot on your stuff, to my report, also to the work I've been doing. So this has really been great. We'd love to have you back too.
I'd be honored.
Jeremy, we've started a trend, since I know you're at least a marksman and shooter, but hunting also, right?
Yeah.
So kind of the curveball that we always throw at our guests, or if you've been out hunting in the past, what's the craziest thing that you've seen, or the craziest thing that's happened to you?
Think of them as dumbass moments. Anything?
That's hard to pick one.
That seems to be a common answer.
Well, gosh, probably 5 years ago. It's really hard to pick one, boy.
Oh yeah.
Take a couple.
I shot at a deer with my bow and just, I botched it. I missed, and it wasn't that far of a shot. 27. Let's see. That might have been maybe 21 yards. In a tree stand, up way too high. I don't do that anymore. It's not fun. And shooting on the other side of the creek. So it looked like it was a lot farther away. Totally botched it and missed. Went back to the same spot maybe a week or two later. It was the same season. Another deer walked up, stood in the exact same spot. And in hindsight, I should have let that deer go. But I was like, man, I missed once. I might miss again. I drilled it and I dropped it. And it was great. It was awesome. Loved to eat venison. Deer was great. I should have let him grow. So I don't know. That was a little bit of a dumbass moment. So, I've had a lot of great experiences hunting. One of my first memories was squirrel hunting with my dad. I don't think we even killed a squirrel, but I very well remember sitting down by the tree in the fall, and I talked about those oak leaves curling up, and I don't know why, but I have the memory of the oak leaves crunching as we're walking in and sitting down in there. So just awesome.
Beautiful moments, aren't they?
Yeah, great. I love sharing hunting experiences with other people. Taking my wife out 10 years ago now for her first turkey. Just awesome. A lot of fun.
Yeah, my daughter always asks, why do you like to hunt so much? And I said, I had to sit and think about it for a little bit before I gave her an answer. And I says, you know what? First off, you see things that you'd never ever see before. Yeah. But the other piece is and this is really the reason I love hunting with somebody else is you're sharing a moment.
Yeah.
And you both see it, and I mean, it's unlike anything.
Yeah, and you get to be out in the natural world and seeing all of God's beauty and the growth of the trees and the wildflowers.
It's exactly
pretty awesome.
It is.
I went out to duck hunt one morning. I overslept by accident, walking up on the wetland, and I could see the water shimmering. I thought, oh my goodness, I'm just gonna walk up and spook them and shoot and done, go home. And I get closer, no ducks. There's 5 river otters swimming around out in the puddle instead. Great experience. Didn't even pull the trigger, no ducks.
Awesome.
It's all right.
It is. It's about the experience,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah.
well, again, we thank you very much for your time and knowledge, and obviously tons of stuff that we left unsaid today. So
Yeah.
we'd love to have you back sometime in the future if that's an opportunity for
Yeah,
you.
it'd be great. I hope people get out and
Yeah.
contact a forester, get some advice.
Awesome. Until then, enjoy your shirt
Thank
and
you.
wear it proudly. And there's very few of those out in the world, so you're
Special.
Special.
I love it.
But until then, we always close with be safe,
have fun, and get outdoors.
Thanks for listening or watching our show. We have some exciting topics and guests coming up.
We ask that you subscribe to our channel on YouTube and follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.
We look forward to hearing your suggestions for topics.
Questions and comments. This is 2 Dumbasses signing off. Until next time,
Be safe,
have fun, and get outdoors.